We're going to talk about springs. I love springs. Springs make me happy. Alright, let's talk about some springs, shall we? Hey everybody, Bill here from KeystoneWeapon.com, and this is a video where I wanted to take a few minutes and talk about springs, because springs seem to be something that comes up on the forums a lot. What spring do I use? What happens if I change to this spring? And I've done a lot of experimenting with springs, and based on what kind of ammo I'm shooting and what I want the gun to feel like and things like that, and also some reliability concerns around springs. I figured I'd take a few minutes and share some of my knowledge with that. So first off, there's a couple springs in a 1911. There is, and here I have, this is a slide for a 45. I actually just Cerakoted it. It's black oxide, or no, I'm sorry, it's matte black Duracoat. This is a slide that goes on my XT22. So you can see this is a little bit of a weird looking gun. This is the XT22, and this particular little gun here, and sorry I'm trying to work around my camera, is a 22 rimfire. It's also capable of accepting this 45 slide that I made for it, so I made that before they had the conversions. Whoa, there went my phone. That was pretty crazy. I made that before they had the conversions for it, so mine's a little bit different, but this slide fits on this gun. And the main spring that you're going to see in this is the recoil spring. And in this particular gun, I use a 16-pound recoil spring, which is the standard for what you're going to see with the Rock Island Armory guns in 45 ACP that are in a 5-inch configuration. Now, some manufacturers are going to use an 18, an 18.5, different calibers, like maybe the 10mm. You're going to see a much stiffer spring to compensate for the recoil and the power of that weapon. Like, for instance, here I have this is for my 10mm. That's a 22-pounder, based on what I tend to shoot with it. Now, I've also run, in my 9mm, I might run a 12-pound factory spring, or depending on what kind of loads I'm shooting, I even go down to like 9 pounds. One thing you have to realize about springs is that the harder the spring, the harder it's going to be to rack the slide, and the harder the spring, the more resistance there is on the slide actually going back, and the faster it's going to return back into the to the battery position. So there are going to be some things dealing with that are going to matter when it comes to choosing your spring, because I've seen a lot of people talk about 18-pound springs, and when I buy them from Wolf, which is the factory standard, if you buy a Rock Island Armory gun made today, they come with Wolf springs. And I actually like Wolf springs. I've tried Wilson springs and a couple other different manufacturers and stuff like that, and to me they're all the same. I can't see any difference in them. The one thing I wanted to talk about was the 16-pound spring versus the 18-pound spring, or 18.5, which is a typical spring rate that you'll see. I've run the 18.5s in a lot of my 1911s and never had a single problem. The thing with the 18-pound spring is, a lot of times with that particular spring, it's going to be a little harder to rack your slide, and your slide's going to move forward much quicker, so the timing is going to be a little bit different. That works great if you're running full power, high power loads, but a lot of times I shoot, some of my reloads are a lot less powerful. They might be like semi-wad cutters, and I'll show you what that looks like. But like, for instance, a lot of times for like target practice or shooting steel plates or whatever, a lot of times I will use I'll use reloads that are lead semi-wad cutters. These are high-tech coated Missouri bullets, and these I shoot at a much slower velocity than your defense loads. If you're shooting defense loads, an 18.5-pound spring's great. But I don't practice all the time, every day, with defense loads, and I know a 16-pounder is going to do the job and eject that round whether I'm using something light or I'm using something a little heavy. So it's kind of a good all-around spring. If you shoot a lot of heavy loads, or you're having trouble with your particular gun failure to return to battery, a higher rated spring might be a good idea. However, what a lot of people do, and what I do, now this is a 9mm, but let's pretend it's a 45, because for all intents and purposes, the action's the same. This one only has a 12-pound spring in it. It's pretty easy to move back, pretty simple. But there's another spring, which is down here, and this is the main spring in the gun, that if I increase the spring rate up here, I usually decrease the spring rate back here, because as you can see, and this gun is clear, when that gun goes back, it's got to move this hammer back, and that hammer is connected to a spring in here. So if I'm adding poundage up here, I usually take some poundage away from here. It will make your trigger feel a little bit lighter, typically. You may or may not even be able to feel it. But this is typically a 23-pound spring. It's a pretty tough little spring, and like this is what they look like. It's a pretty rad, tough little spring, and a lot of times I'll change it down to like about an 18-pounder or something like that, so that it gives it a little bit less resistance pushing this hammer down, being that this one is so tough. So the mainspring, if you've ever changed them, they can be a lot of fun if it's your first time changing them, because of the angle, and there's a little spring cup in there and stuff, and sometimes they go flying all over the place. So you got to be careful when you take those apart. But a lot of times you'll see guys will increase the spring rate up here to get a faster cyclic rate, but they will decrease it down here so that it has a lot less effort pushing the hammer back. Now, you can get these springs in just about any darn weight you want, but if you go too light, you may not get enough firepower out of your hammer, and it may not, like if you're using hard primers like CCIs or particularly like Wolf, you might get light strikes. So 18 pounds is something that I feel comfortable with, and I don't have any light strikes with if I'm going to go with an 18-pounder up here. Typically, like I said, this will be a 16, somewhere around there, and this will be right around a 23. Now that's on a full-size gun. All the rules change when you start changing the size of the gun. For instance, if you're running a small gun, and I'll grab one of them, like this little bitty guy here, and I do need to safety check this because I'm never sure. This is one that I carry all the time. This particular gun, this is hard to rack the slide on, and I'll tell you why. And that's because it uses this little short recoil spring, which is part number 49024, and it's rated for 24 pounds. So this uses, this one I have a 24-pounder in it. I think the factory is a 22-pounder, but if you have a small gun like that, you might want to keep recoil springs around, because these tend to eat up recoil springs much faster because they're so short and has such a short amount of time to stop this inertia of a 45 ACP. That's why these are hard to rack. That's why they have like a real boom, a real punch to them, because you only have that little small amount of space to stop that big amount of recoil. So in my guns, I typically run the 16s, and I run either an 18-pounder or I run a 23-pound mainspring. You can change it, it's just going to act a little bit differently. So if you have a higher powered recoil spring, you're going to get less felt recoil out of the gun, because the slide is going to snap back at a faster rate. However, you don't want to go crazy with your poundage, because that's going to go flying forward. Your barrel's going to go flying up, and you can risk damaging the lower barrel lugs. Now with an 18-pounder, that's probably not going to happen. But if you put a 22-pound spring in a full-size gun, first off, you're going to be shooting some pretty heavy loads to get them to eject, or else it's not going to slide back far enough to eject. And second of all, it's going to really slam forward, and you do risk some frame damage with that kind of amount of power. So with that being said, you have that main spring back here. Whenever you buy Wolf springs, they always throw in these extra power firing pin springs. And I guess that's probably a liability thing, but they will go into the firing pin channel here, so that say you were to drop the gun, drop the gun while holding the beaver tail with the safety off. There's a million things that have to happen. All the stars have to align. But this is a extra power firing pin spring to keep the firing pin from bouncing under inertia. The last thing I wanted to mention is there's another spring in the gun. Obviously, there's a sear spring, so you know I like to tweak these and everything like that to change my trigger pull, and that's a whole nother subject. But typically, I like to use the Wilson or the Wolf springs, whatever. Usually, they're real nice out of the factory anyway, even if they don't look nice. I have some in here that probably don't look nice, and yeah, I mean, this thing looks like it was cut out of sheet metal, but it works. It's awesome. And you could even see it's awesome because I have a smiley face written on it, which means it's like a 3.5 pound trigger. I have my own little weird complex when it comes to labeling stuff, so sorry about that. One other spring that's in the gun, and I'm going to talk about this in another video dealing with lefties, is there's a mag release spring that's in here that you can get all these different versions. I have like a variety kit from Wolf. All these little springs right here, these are all magazine springs, magazine release springs. And this, I have a really light one in. There's 1 through 4 are the numbers, and I believe the higher the number, the softer the spring is. But I can just, as a lefty, I can reach around and just tap that button just a little bit, and my magazine will come flying out. You want to be careful. You don't want to go too light because you might bump that button in your holster and shoot your mag out, and you'll be in Walmart and the magazine will be on the floor and people will be looking at you weird. But those are some of the springs that are in the gun. I wouldn't go wild with changing them out unless you have a reason. Like I mentioned in a 9mm, if I'm shooting really, really soft loads, I may switch to a 9-pound spring. However, I gotta be careful because if I switch to a 9-pound spring and I decide to carry this thing packed full of like Hydra-Shocks or Critical Duty or something like that, when I shoot that gun, it's gonna have an awful lot of recoil, and when that slide comes flying back, there's going to be metal on metal, baby. You're going to be slamming into stuff, and it's going to have a little bit too much, so you risk damaging the weapon. But that's some of the info on springs. I don't know that was particularly helpful to you, but there's a couple different springs in that gun, and it's good to know a little bit about them because people do tend to change stuff. You know what? It doesn't hurt to try it, and it doesn't hurt to have a couple springs around. My springs in my 45s, they last me about 6,000 rounds. In my small gun like this, they last me more like 1,000 rounds, maybe. So for this, I'd buy a 3-pack of them. My 9mm spring, this gun actually is going on. This gun has just passed its 2,000 round mark, somewhere around there. I can't be sure, but it's right around 2,000 rounds with the same spring in it, and I haven't had an issue with it. Same thing with my TCM. My TCM seems to be very gentle on springs, and I've put lots and lots of rounds through it. I've never changed the recoil spring on my XT22, and this has got probably 5,000 rounds through it, I would bet. But it's all going to depend on your shooting, what you're shooting, how much you shoot it, and it does not hurt to have some spare parts, so I'd recommend everybody keep a recoil spring around. They're cheap, and you can buy them directly from gunsprings.com, from Wolf. You can buy them from Brownells, Midway, whatever. You know, I think Wolf directly sells them at a pretty cheap shipping rate. Or go on Brownells, buy yourself some extra mags, and throw a spring in your cart the next time you buy something, you know? But hopefully that helps, and take care, guys. Alright, so that's a little bit about springs. After I watch that back, I don't feel like going in and editing stuff, so I'm just going to add this to the end. This gun right here, the 9mm that I was mentioning before, I said it had 2,000 rounds and I got all excited. I messed up. It's got 20,000 rounds through it. I had the 2-part right, but I screwed up the rest. So this is 20,000 rounds on the same recoil spring. And it's an awesome gun. So hopefully that helps you guys out, and take it easy and stay classy.